It was the kind of message that ends something quietly. No warning, no buildup, just a single line glowing on my phone after a long workday. The kind of line you read twice because the first time does not feel real. It was a tough cut. No space for you. That was all my younger sister Kira wrote. No greeting, no apology, not even my name. Just that one thin sentence, sharp enough to slice through whatever hope I still carried for us. I stood in the doorway of my kitchen, the refrigerator humming behind me, the street outside my apartment settling into its evening stillness. The Oregon heat had pressed itself into the walls all day, and even now, close to 9, the air felt heavy enough to slow my breathing. I stared at the message until the words began to blur. I waited for my chest to tighten, or for my hands to shake, or for the sting of humiliation to rise behind my eyes. But nothing came. The truth is, betrayal feels different when you saw it forming long before it arrived. When a family has spent years pretending cracks are character and silence is love, the final break does not land like a surprise. It lands like confirmation. I typed one word. Understood. Not angry, not pleading. Just a quiet acknowledgement of a truth that had been standing between us for years. I set the phone on the counter and listened to the quiet of my apartment. The clock on the microwave blinked its slow rhythm, casting blue light across the room. A glass of cold coffee sat forgotten by the sink. My shoes were still on. My bag still hung from my shoulder, but nothing in me moved. My family had always been loud about the things that did not matter, and silent about the things that did. So of course, the moment they made the decision to erase me would come in the form of a text sent without punctuation. I slipped off my shoes, walked to my bedroom, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed pale in the dim room. I did not hesitate. I typed in dates, clicked through flight options, and booked a ticket to the Maldives for the next morning. A beachfront villa, a single queen bed, ocean view, breakfast included. There was a kind of power in booking a life somewhere no one expected you to go. I did not call my mom. I did not call my dad. I did not text a friend to say something dramatic like, "You won't believe what she did." I closed the laptop, pulled my suitcase from the back of my closet, and packed as quickly as I could. Clothes rolled tight, toiletries zipped, passport tucked in an outer pocket. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. When you have spent years preparing for emotional exits, the physical ones come easy. I kept the lights on until midnight, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because the silence inside my apartment felt like a living thing that might swallow me whole if I let it. Before I go any further, let me pause for a moment. I always like knowing what people are doing when they listen to stories like this. It makes the world feel a little closer, a little more human. So if you feel like it, share it in the comments later. When all of this happened, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, with the taste of cold coffee still on my tongue, watching my life tilt in a direction I could no longer pretend not to see. By dawn, I was buckled into a window seat on a flight bound for Los Angeles, where I would connect to a seaplane across the world. The cabin lights glowed soft and dim. People murmured quietly, half asleep. I rested my forehead against the cool window and watched the sky shift from navy to pale gold as the plane cut through the first stretch of morning. I tried to sleep, but my mind replayed the message again and again. No space for you. Those 4 words carried more truth than any fight we had ever had. They did not remove me by accident. They carved me out of the picture on purpose. Some betrayals come with shouting. Some come with slammed doors or broken heirlooms, or long text paragraphs meant to wound. Mine came with a surgical line delivered at 8:58 in the evening. A clean cut, a deliberate one. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, I moved through the terminal in a kind of detached focus. I ate something tasteless at a terminal cafe, then boarded the international flight that would carry me across the Pacific. 12 hours of humming engines, dimmed cabin lights, and sleep that came in thin, breakable stretches. When the second plane descended toward the Maldives, the ocean beneath us was so blue it looked unreal, like someone had painted it from memory. Warm air wrapped itself around me the moment I stepped off the seaplane. Everything smelled like salt and sunlight and something soft I could not name. Staff greeted me with gentle smile, the kind that didn't carry expectation or history or strings. No one here knew who I was. No one needed anything from me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I did not feel pulled apart by invisible hands demanding help or silence or forgiveness. In my villa, I dropped my suitcase by the bed and stepped onto the private deck. The ocean stretched before me, calm and wide, a new page waiting to be written. I let the sound of the water settle into my chest. I let myself breathe. The next morning was the day of Kira's wedding. I woke early, not because I cared about the ceremony, but because sunlight poured across the room, reflecting off the water in bright, shifting shapes. I made a small cup of coffee in the villa's machine and took it outside. The tide moved softly across the sand below, pull itself in thin lines like a heartbeat. My phone was inside. I could have left it untouched all day. I could have spent the morning swimming or reading or walking along the shoreline. But habit is a powerful thing. Curiosity, even more so. Maybe a part of me craved closure. Maybe another part needed proof that the chapter had truly ended. I went inside, picked up the phone, and turned it on. Notifications blinked through like sparks. Work emails, promotional ads, a weather alert back in Oregon, warning of an unexpected heat wave. Then, TikTok opened automatically, probably from muscle memory. The first video hit before I had a chance to brace myself. A shaky clip of Kira standing at the altar in a white dress far too dramatic for her frame. Her mascara streaked down both cheeks in thick black lines. Her mouth hung open as if she were yelling at someone off camera. The audio was muffled, but her face said everything. Panic, rage, something breaking open in real time. People turned toward the aisle. The camera swung around and caught Thomas, her groom, walking away. Not storming, not running, walking. Steady, controlled. Like a man choosing the exit he should have taken long before this ceremony ever existed. Comments flooded the screen. Bride meltdown. Guess someone lied. Marriage ended before it began. I watched in silence, the room around me blurring into soft shapes. I did not save the video. I did not send it to anyone. I just watched. Another clip loaded, this one closer, clearer. A bridesmaid tried to straighten Kira's veil while Kira sobbed so hard her whole body shook. The officiant stood frozen, unsure whether to continue or leave. A small child somewhere in the crowd began crying. Then the camera turned again, catching Thomas's mother guiding him firmly toward the exit. My phone started ringing. First my mom, then my dad, then my aunt, then a number from California I didn't recognize. One call after another, like a domino line falling. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I didn't even press silence. I let the calls stack over each other until my phone buzzed itself into exhaustion. No space for you. Suddenly, they all had space for me. Too much space. Desperate space. A light breeze crossed the deck. I stepped outside and let my feet touch the warm wood. The ocean stretched endlessly before me. Calm in a way my family had never been. I expected to feel triumph or vindication or grief, but instead, something quieter rose inside me. A line being drawn exactly where it should have been drawn years ago. The phone buzzed again behind me. I didn't turn around. I walked to the edge of the deck and watched the water shift from pale blue to bright turquoise. The sun climbed higher, turning everything white and gold. I had no idea yet about the lies unraveling at that wedding. No idea about the debt waiting like a storm back home. No idea about the voicemail that would tell me I was suddenly the only one who could save them. All I knew then was this. For the first time since childhood, nobody was asking me to fix anything. I stayed there until the phone finally went silent. I breathed in, I breathed out, and I let the distance between us stretch wider. But silence has its own gravity, and in that stillness, something tugged at me, pulled me backward to the moment all of this truly began. Not the text that cut me out of the wedding, not the meltdown on TikTok, not even the trip to the Maldives. The beginning was quieter, smaller, almost forgettable if not for the way it changed everything. It happened a few weeks before the wedding, on a gray afternoon in my parents' house. when none of us wanted to admit how close the financial storm had crept. I remember pulling into their driveway. The porch light already flicked on, even though it was barely past 4. The house had the same faded paint, the same crooked welcome mat, the same wind chime that hit the wrong notes whenever the breeze blew. But something in the air felt different. Heavy, as if the walls were waiting to hear what we would do next. I stepped inside and heard no laughter, no footsteps, none of the usual noise that filled that house. Instead, my dad sat hunched over the dining table, sorting through papers with his glasses pushed halfway down his nose. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that did not come from age, but from years of trying to outrun them. Same problem. My mom stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. She barely lifted her head when I walked in. She said you made it home in this flat voice that told me everything and nothing. I asked what was wrong. She said nothing we can't deal with, which was exactly how she answered every question she did not want me to press. I walked over to my dad and glanced at the stack of envelopes. Most of them were marked past due. Some were stamped with the final notice. One had a red sticker from the bank. He covered it with his hand before I could read more. He said he was handling it. He said these things take time. He said it would be fine once the wedding was settled. I knew what he meant, but I asked anyway. What does Kira's wedding have to do with bank debt? My mom shot me a look that warned me to drop it. So I did, at least for that moment. A few minutes later, Kira came down the stairs in a rush of perfume and hairspray. Her smile flickered like a candle, bright for a second, then gone. She hugged me quickly and held on a little too long, the way people do when they hope you won't ask questions. She kept smoothing her hair behind her ear, adjusting her shirt, checking her phone, avoiding my eyes. Finally, she said she needed to talk to me in private and asked me to come upstairs. Her old bedroom looked almost the same as when she was a teenager. Pink curtain still hanging, the same vanity mirror lined with lights, the same framed photos of her smiling at events where she had always been the center. She closed the door behind us and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, she did not speak. She just twisted her engagement ring around her finger again and again, like the metal was heating under her skin. I waited. I had learned long ago that Kira only spoke the truth when she was ready. After a long silence, she finally said she needed to tell me something, but I had to. Promise not to freak out. I didn't promise anything. I just told her to talk. She took a breath so deep I thought she might hold it forever. Then she said it. I am not pregnant. She said it quietly, barely above a whisper, like she hoped the walls wouldn't hear her. I blinked once, letting the words settle in my chest. She watched me carefully, waiting for my reaction. I didn't gasp. I didn't scold. I didn't ask how she could lie about something so big. I simply asked why she said she was. Her shoulders dropped with relief and tension all at once. She got up and started pacing the small room. She said she had to. She said Thomas kept dragging his feet about the timeline and his parents wanted for them to wait until next year. She said she didn't have time to wait, not with everything happening at home, not with the debt weighing on mom and dad, not with the idea that marrying into a wealthy family could change things overnight. Then she told me the truth in one long stream of panic. She knew the story of a pregnancy would push the wedding forward. She knew no one would challenge her once she said it. She knew Thomas was too kind to question it. Too in love, too hopeful. She said it was not forever. She planned to say she lost the baby after the wedding. She said people do that all the time. She said it wouldn't hurt anyone. I remember leaning against her dresser, feeling every part of the room tilt slightly. She kept talking, pacing, breathing faster, convincing herself this was a small lie that would fix a big problem. She said our family needed this marriage. She said it was the fastest way to keep our parents from drowning. She said she was doing this for all of us. When she finally stopped, she looked at me with eyes full of expectation. She needed me to say it was okay. She needed me to validate the plan. She needed me to carry a piece of the lie so she would not feel its full weight alone. I told her no. The word came out steady and soft, but it felt like a stone dropping between us. She froze. I told her I would not help her lie. I would not nod along. I would not stand at her wedding pretending everything was real when I knew Thomas was being pulled into a life built on panic and desperation. I said I loved her but I would not shield her from the consequences of her choices. Her face changed slowly, like someone dimming a light. First disbelief, then insult, then anger bloomed under her skin. She said I was judging her. She said I was abandoning her. She said I had no idea what pressure she was under. She said she was trying to save our parents while I stood there pretending I was morally superior. I didn't argue. I told her calmly that I refused to participate in something that would destroy someone else, just to save us. She sank back onto the bed, shaking her head. "You always do this. You always ruin things when I need you to just support me." Her voice cracked like it did when we were kids, but there was nothing childish about the desperation in it now. The door opened without warning. My mom stepped inside wearing that tired smile she reserved for moments she wished she could skip. She asked what was going on. Before I could speak, Kira jumped in. She said I was making her feel guilty. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was making everything harder. My mom sighed like she had been expecting this. She took my sister's side without needing to hear mine. She told me the wedding was important. She told me the family needed stability. She told me Kira was doing what she had to do. She reminded me that I was the older sister, the reliable one, the one who always kept the peace. She said maybe this was not the time to get stuck on ideals. She framed it like love, but it felt like pressure wrapped in pretty language. I told her I would not lie. Not for them. Not for anyone. My mom flinched at the firmness in my voice. She said I was blowing things out of proportion. She said no one was asking me to lie, just to be supportive. She said this family needed unity. It became clear in that moment that unity meant silence. Unity meant compliance. Unity meant protecting the lie at all costs. And I had already broken the unspoken rule by refusing to participate. Kira stood up slowly, her expression shifting into something cold and unfamiliar. She studied me like she was recalibrating her understanding of who I was. She had always counted on me stepping in, smoothing things over, absorbing the fallout. But not this time. For several long seconds, we just stared at each other. No raised voices, no dramatic exit, just the quiet understanding that she saw me differently now. Not as her sister, not as her ally, but as a threat. Someone who could unravel everything she had built her future on. Someone she needed to remove from the equation. That was the last time she looked at me without resentment. She held my gaze for a long moment. There was no anger, not yet. Just a calculation, a slow narrowing of the space between who she wanted me to be and who I actually was. That was the last time she looked at me without resentment. In the days that followed, things shifted in ways so subtle at first that I almost convinced myself they were accidents. A missed message, a forgotten detail, a change of plan mentioned too casually. But small things add up. They always do. And by the end of that week, the pattern was too clear to ignore. My sister had not only decided that I was dangerous to her plan, she had already begun erasing me from the event that was supposed to unite our families. It started when I noticed the rehearsal dinner itinerary posted in the shared group chat she had created months earlier. I scrolled through it twice before realizing my name was not on any line. Not as a reader, not as a greeter, not as a bridesmaid. Nothing. I searched again, thinking I had overlooked something. But the roster showed every cousin and childhood friend. Even people I barely remembered from her sorority days were there. I typed a short message to ask if the list was final. The chat bubble showed she was typing. Then it stopped. No reply came. By the next morning, I woke to find myself removed from the group entirely. The chat was gone. The photos of the wedding dress fitting, the venue walkthrough, the cake tasting, all vanished from my phone. At first, I wondered if it was a glitch, but then I noticed that I was still in every other group chat I had ever been in, only this one was missing. Later that afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house again. I told myself I was only dropping off a package that had been delivered to my address by mistake. But really, I wanted to see if something had changed since that tense conversation. In Kira's bedroom, maybe she had cooled down. Maybe my mom had realized the burden she was placing on both of us. Maybe the silence was a misunderstanding. The moment I walked in, I felt the shift. My dad looked up from the kitchen table and nodded at me, but did not say much. My mom came out of the laundry room, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and gave me a smile that never reached her eyes. I asked if Kira was around. She said she was out running errands with Thomas's family. Her voice held something careful, like she was choosing each word with tweezers. I lingered for a few minutes, pretending to sort mail that did not belong to me. I asked casual questions, hoping someone would offer an explanation. No one did. Finally, I decided to leave. But on my way out, I passed the dining room where my mom had laid out the seating chart for the wedding reception. She was rewriting a few cards, crossing out misspellings, adjusting table assignments. I paused without thinking, drawn to the chart like I was following the sound of my own heartbeat. I scanned the lists of names quickly, then slower still. I was not on it. Not at the family table, not at the friends table. Not even at the back corner table reserved for +1s and distant relatives who no one knew how to seat politely. It was like someone had taken a pair of scissors and cleanly snipped my existence out of the celebration. I asked her about it, even though I already knew the answer. My mom glanced at the chart, then at me. She told me not to read too much into it. She said wedding seating was complicated. She said maybe Kira had not finished everything yet. She said it so quickly that she almost tripped over her own reassurance. It was the voice she used when she hoped I would drop the subject before she had to. Lie more directly. I nodded, because what else was there to do? The truth was already sitting in the air between us. If she had wanted me there, she would have said so. If she had wanted to defend me, she would have. Instead, she folded another place card, smoothed the corner, and said I should not worry. On my drive home, I turned off the radio and rolled the windows down. The cold air snapped against my face and forced me to stay awake in the moment. Denial slipped away mile by mile until I reached my apartment and finally let myself feel the sting of it. Not the sting of being unwanted, the sting of being silenced, removed, not out of hatred, something colder than that, necessity. It was not that she did not want me there, it was that she could not risk me being there. I held the truth she needed, buried. And people protect their lies the same way they protect their bank accounts, aggressively, quietly, completely. The next morning my mom called. I hesitated before answering. She spoke too quickly again, filling the silence with details I had not asked for. She talked about floral arrangements, catering deadlines, guest list overflow. She never mentioned the seating chart, not once. When I asked if everything was okay, she paused a little too long before saying everything was fine. Families just get stressed around wedding. She reminded me that Kira was under a lot of pressure. Then she said something that settled into me like a cold stone. Try not to make this harder than it needs to be. It was not a request. It was a warning disguised as concern. After that call, something inside me settled with clarity. They were not freezing me out because they disliked me. They were not avoiding me because they were angry. They were excluding me because my presence threatened the plan. I was not a sister anymore. I was a liability. And liabilities get removed early. I wish I could say I fought it. I wish I could say I stood up for myself, or demanded answers, or forced someone to admit the truth. But I did none of that. I did not have the energy anymore. I felt like someone standing on a shore, watching a ship leave without her, not because she arrived too late, but because the crew never intended to take her in the first place. I kept waiting for Kira to reach out, a text, a call, a voice note, even a half-hearted apology for losing her temper, but she stayed silent. She knew what the stakes were. If I had a seat at the table, someone might ask why I had been distant. If someone asked, I might speak, and if I spoke, the truth would spill, whether I meant to or not. So she did the one thing she believed she had to do. She erased me. That weekend, I opened the wedding website she had sent me months earlier. The homepage still showed the smiling picture of her and Thomas on Cannon Beach, wind whipping her hair, his hand on her shoulder. When I clicked the schedule tab, my stomach tightened. The rehearsal dinner lineup was updated. New names added, old ones rearranged. My name was nowhere, not even buried in the logistics. I closed my laptop and walked around my apartment, touching objects, just to prove to myself that I was still here. A real person, not a placeholder someone could delete with the click of a button. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the small dry erase board I kept on the wall. It held reminders of my week, a few work deadlines, a dentist appointment, and circled in black marker the wedding date my sister had begged me to save 6 months earlier. I picked up the marker and stood there for a long moment. My chest felt too tight to take a full breath. There was no anger, only a hollow clarity. I was done fighting for a place in a room that had already locked its doors. I opened my laptop again and booked my trip to the Maldives. Same resort, same beachfront suite. This time with no hesitation, no guilt, no explanation. I clicked confirm and watched the screen brighten as if giving me permission to step away from a life that had made me feel small for too long. Then I walked back to the dry erase board. I lifted my hand and wiped the wedding date away. The marker residue smeared under my palm. The circle dissolved. The number faded. And with that simple motion, I felt something inside me release for the first time in years. I went to bed in silence, knowing I had just closed the last door they had left open for me. The morning after I wiped the wedding date off my calendar, I woke with a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes when a decision has already been made and there is nothing left to debate. I packed my suitcase with more care than I expected, folding clothes I barely wore at home and choosing things not for anyone else's expectations, but for my own comfort. My flight left before sunrise. The airport felt quiet in a way that matched my own quiet. I moved through security without thinking, boarded the plane, and settled into my seat with the kind of exhaustion that makes you feel weightless. Somewhere over the Pacific, I finally closed my eyes. Not to sleep, exactly, but to rest from the noise of the weeks before. The lie, the plan, the erasure. It all felt distant from the moment I saw the water below shift from deep blue to the lighter, clear tones that meant we were approaching the Maldives. When the plane touched down on the small runway and the doors opened, the warm air met me like an embrace I did not know I needed. A speedboat carried me to the resort, the kind of place people visit to celebrate anniversaries or escape winters back home. Staff greeted me with soft smiles and offered cool towels that smelled faintly of citrus. No one asked why I had traveled alone. No one asked who I was. No one asked what I could do for them. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt invisible in the best possible way. My villa faced the ocean. Its deck stretched over the water with a ladder that dropped directly into the lagoon. I let my suitcase sit unopened for an hour while I walked barefoot across the smooth wood, listening to the soft break of waves against the stilts. A part of me expected my phone to buzz again with more damage control attempts from back home. But it stayed quiet, tucked somewhere in my purse, untouched. Eventually, I unpacked and set up my laptop so I could keep working remotely. Even on vacation, I never fully stepped away from my job. It was not that I was indispensable. It was simply easier sometimes to keep moving than to sit fully still. I logged into the system, answered a few emails, reviewed a timeline, scheduled a meeting for the next week. My coworkers knew I was traveling, but did not know why. I told them I needed a reset week. That was true in ways I had not admitted even to myself. Late that afternoon, I wandered to the small cafe near the resort's dive shop. The wooden tables sat just above the sand, and a long pergola overhead filtered the sunlight into soft, shifting patterns. I ordered iced tea and sat near the edge. Another woman was there, typing on her laptop with the sort of concentration that suggested she had also slipped away from something. She had short brown hair, sunburned shoulders, and a pair of sunglasses pushed into her hair like a headband. After a few quiet minutes, she glanced over and said hello. Her voice carried an ease I instantly liked. She told me her name was Rachel Donovan, and that she was working remotely for a few days while her partner finished a conference in Singapore. She asked if I was traveling for business or just needing a break. I said a break. She nodded like she understood more than my single word explained. We kept our conversation light. She talked about her marketing clients, and I told her a little about my job. Not enough to get personal. Not enough to open a door I was not ready to open. She seemed to sense that. She did not press. She did not pry. She did not take my quiet as a challenge to fill. Instead, she shifted her attention back to her screen whenever I drifted into me. Thoughts. It struck me then how rare that was, meeting someone who did not demand pieces of me to feel connected. Someone who respected the border between familiarity and intrusion. It made me aware of how much I had let people at home cross those borders without resistance, how much I had allowed myself to be the glue holding everything together, even when no one asked how that burden felt. Rachel made no assumptions. She listened only when I chose to speak. It felt strange and strangely comforting. At one point, she closed her laptop and stretched her arms overhead, letting out a long breath. "Work feels different here," she said. "Like the air insists you go slower." I smiled because she was right. Even my thoughts moved more gently. I told her I had not felt this relaxed in months. She took a sip of her drink and said people underestimate how good it feels to be somewhere you have no history. Somewhere you are not needed by anyone. Somewhere your name holds no weight. I felt those words settle inside me in a way that was almost painful. We parted ways after a little while, and I walked along the shoreline, letting the warm water push over my feet in soft, rhythmic waves. Each step felt lighter. The wind carried no memory of arguments or secrets or guilt. The ocean made no demands. The sky did not ask me to shrink myself to fit inside my family's expectations. I felt the first real exhale I had taken in weeks. Back at the villa, I showered and changed into a loose dress, then sat outside again with my legs curled under me. The sun dipped low, setting the water on fire with oranges and golds. I watched the light change, minute by minute, like a slow, deliberate reminder that the world continued turning even when I stopped. Participating in someone else's drama, I found myself thinking about the difference between being needed and being valued. I had spent years confusing the two. My family needed me to mediate, to stabilize, to cushion consequences. But that need had nothing to do with respect. Rachel, in the short time I had spoken to her, had shown me more respect than my family had given me in months. She did not need me. And because she did not need anything from me, she saw me clearly. A person, not a utility. That night, I fell asleep with the windows open, the sound of water tapping gently at the supports beneath the villa. My dreams were unremarkable, which was a relief. No wedding, no lies, no flashing phones, just sleep without interruption. The next morning, I woke early, before the staff began walking along the boardwalk. The sky was still soft with that purple color that only lasts a few minutes before sunrise. I made coffee in the little machine on the counter and carried the mug out to the pick deck, wrapping myself in a thin blanket even though the air was warm. I sat cross-legged on the wooden planks and watched the horizon lighten with each passing second. There was a quiet moment that I had never felt at home. A quiet that did not come from suppression or fear, or waiting for the next demand. It was the quiet of being untethered, of having no responsibilities except noticing the world in front of me. The water below bristled with tiny ripples. A bird glided low across the surface, wings almost touching the sea. Somewhere behind me, a kettle whistled from another villa. Life moved gently around me. I lifted my phone once, just to check the time. No missed calls, no messages, no reminders of anything waiting back home. I set it face down beside me and let the coffee warm my hands. For a brief, rare moment, I felt entirely outside the gravity of other people's expectations. Unnecessary, unburdened, free. It stayed quiet like that for a long time, before the world would shift again. The sun rose fully, spreading gold across the surface of the water, while I sat with my coffee and let the warmth settle into my chest. I could have stayed there the entire morning, watching the light change, listening to the small waves tap against the supports. But when I finally reached for my phone again, the screen lit up with a flood of notifications that made the calm around me shatter like thin glass. TikTok alerts, mentions, shares, viral tags. I frowned, swiped into the app, and felt something in me tighten when I saw the first video. It was the same clip I had glimpsed before, but now it had exploded everywhere. The shaky camera, Kira's mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her voice caught in a high-pitched wail as she tried to pull Thomas back toward the altar. What I had seen earlier was only the beginning. New angles, new recordings, new captions had multiplied overnight. I tapped the next video. Thomas stood tall near the front of the aisle, his shoulders squared, his face pale but steady. Someone had managed to record him from close enough that his words carried clearly. I would rather leave now than live a lie forever. The sound of those words landed heavy in my chest. He spoke to them calmly, not with anger, not with humiliation, but with a finality that made even the people holding cameras fall silent. In the background of the clip, guests looked stunned. A woman gasped. Someone whispered loudly, "Is he serious?" Another person said, "Dear God," as the murmurs rose. Kira reached for him, insisting something I could not fully hear. He stepped back from her touch. That small movement broke something in her. She tried to hold herself together, but her sobbing grew louder, wild, uncontained. Then came the third video. This one was recorded from near the reception hall doorway. I recognized the linoleum floor, the patterned wallpaper my parents had chosen after repainting the building last year. A bridesmaid stood with her phone to her ear, frantic. She said, "He knows. He knows about the pregnancy. He knows someone told him it was not true. He knows Hannah refused to lie." The name hit me like an unexpected wave. Hearing it spoken aloud in the chaos of that moment felt like a truth finally freed. Another clip began automatically. Thomas was talking to Kira's maid of honor, his voice strained but audible. "So your entire family knew." The maid of honor hesitated, stammered, wiped her eyes, then nodded. She seemed torn between protecting Kira and absolving herself. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a small circle like he needed movement to keep from unraveling. Then he stopped suddenly and asked a question so sharp, so sincere, that the recording seemed to still be around it. "Where is Hannah?" There was shuffling, whispering, some awkward glances. Finally, someone told him I did not make the guest list. He frowned and asked what that meant. They said I was busy or could not attend or something vague that changed with each voice. The truth hung thick between their words. He understood it instantly. The video ended there, but the next one picked up his reaction in a different corner of the room. He stared at the double doors leading back to the ceremony, then at the exit, then at the hallway that led to the bridal suite. For a moment, he looked torn between confrontation and escape. Then the decision settled across his features in one slow exhale. He shook his head. He whispered something like, "I cannot do this." And then he walked. Not hurried, not panicking, not fueled by rage, just done. Finished. A man stepping out of a life he realized was built on someone else's scaffolding. A man who understood that marrying into a lie would cost him far more than walking away ever could. The last of the viral clips showed him leaving the venue through the side doors. His parents followed a few steps behind, faces tight with concern. Someone tried to chase him, but he kept going. A woman yelled at the camera to stop filming. Another person cried out that this wedding was cursed. The footage cut off as the door closed behind him. I sat there on the deck, the bright morning sun shining across the phone screen, making everything look unreal. My heart thudded hard against my ribs. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. What I felt was something deeper, heavier, the kind of sadness that comes when truth finally breaks open and sweeps through everything without mercy. New notifications kept popping up. People around the world were stitching the clips, adding commentary, speculating about the lies, the scandal, the betrayal. I set the phone down for a moment, rubbing my hands together nervously. I knew this was only the online part. The real storm would not hit until my family realized what had happened. I picked the phone back up and opened another clip. It was filmed from behind the altar. In this one, Kira was yelling that she was pregnant, that Thomas was being dramatic, that he was humiliating her on her big day. Her voice cracked each time she tried to insist on the lie. A woman next to her whispered angrily that the test was fake and she should stop, digging a deeper hole. Kira shouted that she had done everything for love, for family, for their future. Her voice held none of the sweet tone she usually used in public. It was raw and full of desperation. Thomas did not turn around. He stood still, his jaw clenched, his back straight, his silence louder than any argument could have been. When he finally spoke again, his voice was clear. "I deserve a marriage built on truth, not this. Someone off camera whispered that he looked sick. Someone else whispered that the bride had trapped him. I felt my breath shorten. This was no longer a private disaster. This was a collapse broadcast to strangers everywhere. Another clip loaded, one from the reception hall entrance. My dad stood near a table, running his hands through his hair, muttering that everything would be fine if people would just calm down. My mom was crying into a napkin, telling someone that things had gotten out of hand, insisting they could still fix it. An older relative said the family had pushed too hard for this marriage, and now truth was tearing it apart. A younger cousin asked again what everyone meant about the pregnancy. The room buzzed with panic. Then, clear as day, someone said my name in the recording. They said Hannah knew. They said she refused to support the lie. They said that was why she was not invited. Hearing it spoken by people I had grown up around felt like standing in two places at once. Present, safe, barefoot on a deck above turquoise water, and also in that hall, surrounded by confusion, betrayal, and consequences, finally converging. I opened another clip. In this one, Thomas was near the exit, holding his phone. His father stood beside him, trying to convince him to leave before things escalated further. A bridesmaid approached him timidly and said she was sorry. He nodded once, then asked again if anyone had seen me. A groomsman said I did not come. Thomas frowned, frustrated. He asked if anyone had asked me to come. The silence that followed answered him louder than words. Someone finally whispered that Kira had taken me off the list, that she had removed my name from everything, that she did not want me there because I might ruin her big day. The look on Thomas's face then made my stomach twist. It was not anger, it was disappointing. Deep, weary disappointment. He whispered one sentence that the camera barely caught. She removed the one person who told the truth. I pressed my lips together, fighting the unexpected sting of tears. I had not expected him to defend me. I had not expected him to see my absence as a sign of something good. All I had ever done was choose honesty over convenience. Hearing him acknowledge that felt like a quiet affirmation I had not known I needed. The videos continued. Each one pieced together a fuller picture of how everything had unraveled. Guest recordings captured fragments of conversations. Someone said Kira had panicked when she realized someone told Thomas the truth. Another person said the lie had reached him from more than one source. A few whispered that the family should not have pushed so hard for the marriage. A small group huddled outside, saying they had known something was off for weeks. My hands felt cold as I scrolled. The final clip showed Thomas stepping into the sunlight outside the venue, pausing for a moment at the edge of the walkway. His mother put a hand on his back. His father held the door open. He looked up, eyes red but steady, and said, "I will not build a life on a lie." Then he walked to the car. The cameraman whispered that he hoped the groom would be all right. Then the clip ended. I stared at my phone in the bright morning light until the screen dimmed on its own. My pulse was racing, but the world around me stayed impossibly calm. The waves moved in slow strokes. The sky glowed with soft pastels. A bird skimmed the water with its wings. Everything peaceful, everything steady, everything untouched by the chaos unraveling thousands of miles away. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it felt like to be him in that moment, standing at the center of a storm he had not created, choosing to walk away rather than let the lie swallow him whole. And then I imagined him asking for me. The one person not present, the one truth teller removed to protect the illusion. My throat tightened. I reached for the phone again, but instead of opening another video, I pressed the button to turn the screen black. Then I set it face down on the wooden deck beside me and let out a long, slow breath. I was not there. I had not caused the disaster. I had simply stepped aside and allowed the truth to reveal itself. And now that it had, I wanted nothing in the world except this moment of quiet. I folded my legs beneath me and closed my eyes while the phone stayed dark at my side. For a long moment, I let myself drift, letting the breeze wash over my skin, letting the salt in the air settle around me like something protective. But peace is never permanent when your family has spent years perfecting the art of hiding their problems behind closed doors. Eventually, silence gives way. Eventually, The truth claws its way to the surface, and when it does not arrive softly. That afternoon, I decided to stay inside the villa and rest. I turned on the small flat-screen TV mounted near the bed, thinking I would watch something simple and let my mind settle. But instead of the Travel Channel or some old sitcom, the resort's newsfeed had already picked up the story from back home. Not in detail, not with names, but the headline was unmistakable. Oregon groom walks out of wedding after shocking revelation. Below it were short clips pulled from the viral TikTok videos, blurred to protect identities, but obvious enough for anyone who knew the people involved. My chest tightened. I considered turning it off right then. But something in me needed to see what the world had uncovered that I had not yet seen myself. The station shifted from the TikTok clips to footage taken by guests who had uploaded longer videos to social media. One clip showed the inside of the reception hall. Chaotic, voices echoing off the high ceilings. Tables remained untouched, food sitting untouched under warmers, decorations half pulled apart by frantic hands. My dad stood by the punch table, his face flushed, his hands gesturing in wide arcs as he tried to calm a group of relatives. My mom was near the cake, wiping at her eyes helplessly. The camera panned across the room and caught several guests arguing in sharp tones. In the background, someone shouted she was under pressure. Another person snapped, "This is not her fault." Someone else added that the stress was too much. Over and over, the same justifications bounced between walls. It was as if they believed that repeating them loudly enough would erase the reality of what had actually happened. The clip changed suddenly. The angle came from someone sitting near the back of the hall. I recognized the wooden doors that led to the courtyard. People had gathered there in clusters, speaking in tense whispers. A woman in a blue dress paced in circles, hands pressed to her temples. A man in a suit kept shaking his head, like he could not believe what had taken place. Then the camera settled on someone seated quietly in the middle of the chaos. Grand Margaret. She sat tall and composed, her spine straight, her hands resting gently on the handle of her cane. She had always been small in stature, but powerful in presence, the kind of woman whose silence carried more authority than most people's shouting. She watched the room with sharp eyes, taking in every detail, not participating in the excuses being shouted around her. The camera zoomed in slightly, catching her expression. It was not a shock, it was a certainty. Like she had expected this fall long before it came. Someone next to her leaned forward and whispered that Kira had locked herself in the bridal suite. Someone else murmured that Thomas had left and was refusing to answer calls. Another relative said the entire thing had turned into a disaster, and the family needed to focus on damage control. They said it as if truth were an inconvenience, something to be patched over, repainted, hidden again until it faded. Then, in the middle of all the noise, Grandma Margaret slowly rose to her feet. The room quieted in a ripple, like a stone dropped into water. People turned, some reluctantly, some with relief, because when she stood, everyone in the family knew it meant she had something to say. She tapped her cane lightly on the floor and spoke with a voice stronger than I. Remembered. She said everyone needed to stop. She said the truth had been broken in that room long before the groom walked away. She said lies had been layered on lies, and the family had allowed it to happen because it was easier than admitting how far things had gone wrong. She turned her gaze toward my dad. He looked down like a scolded child, his shoulders sinking. She turned her gaze toward my mom next. My mom pressed a tissue to her lips and stared at the floor. Then Grandma lifted her voice just enough for the entire hall to hear her clearly. The person who told the truth was erased. The person who protected honesty was cast aside. This family removed the only voice that could have saved them from this humiliation. No one spoke. Even the children who had been crying earlier fell silent. The camera captured the shift in the room. The collective realization that the problem was not the lie about the pregnancy. The problem was the willingness to choose comfort over integrity. One of my aunts protested weakly that Kira had been under pressure. Another added that Kira wanted what was best for the family. Grandma raised her hand and the room stopped again. She said wanting the best for the family did not mean breaking another person's life to achieve it. She said the lie was not an act of love. It was an act of fear and selfishness. And worst of all, she said, The family had punished the wrong person. She had always been the moral compass of our family, the one who did not tolerate cruelty disguised as duty. But hearing her say these things aloud, in a room full of relatives who had chosen silence for so long, made something tighten in my throat. The clip shifted to another angle. Grant had moved toward the center of the room with the help of her cane. She stood in front of a table where an envelope lay next to a vase of flowers. She tapped the envelope and said she had come that day not only to witness her granddaughter's wedding, but also to share an update regarding her will. The room buzzed in surprise. My dad stepped forward as if to stop her. She shook her head, and he froze. She said she had always intended to divide her estate equally among her grandchildren. But recent events had shown her something important. She said inheritance was not simply money or property. It was a reflection of values, a legacy of character, and character was proven not in comfort, but in the face of pressure. She tapped the envelope again and announced that she had amended her will earlier that month. Her entire inheritance would now go to me, not because I was older, not because I was more responsible, not even because I lived a quieter, steadier life, but because I had chosen truth when the rest of the family chose convenience. Gasps filled the room. Someone muttered that it was unfair. Another person whispered that she was being dramatic. But Grandma spoke over them. She said this was not punishment. This was accountability. She said you cannot build a family on lies and then expect the next generation to thrive. She said the inheritance was not a reward for me. It was a consequence of what the family had done. My mom pressed her hand to her chest. My dad took a step back. The shock on their faces was unmistakable. They had known the lie was wrong, but they had not expected a reckoning. Grandma finished speaking and looked around the room one more time. She said everyone had a choice that day. They could continue to protect the lie and spiral deeper into the consequences that would follow. Or they could accept the truth, face the damage it caused, and start rebuilding with integrity. Then she sat down again, calm, composed, as if she had merely commented on the weather. The clip ended. The news feed shifted to a talking head summarizing the events with phrases like alleged deception and controversial family dispute and inheritance announcement. Creates shockwaves. I reached for the remote and turned the volume down before muting the television entirely. I sat there on the bed of the resort villa, staring at the black screen, hearing the faint echo of Grandma's voice in my mind. The person who told the truth was erased. The room around me felt too still, too quiet, as if trying to absorb the weight of everything I had just seen. I thought about my parents and how lost they must have looked at that moment. I thought about Kira alone in the bridal suite, clinging to fragments of a life she had tried to build out of desperation. I thought about how none of them had considered what this lie would cost until it finally collapsed. And then I thought about Grandma, her strength, her clarity, her refusal to let the family twist the truth into something prettier just because. It made them uncomfortable. I stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains back. The ocean glimmered under the late afternoon sun, waves brushing against the stilts below with quiet insistence. I felt the pull of that quiet, the invitation to rest, to breathe, to let the truth settle inside me without tearing me apart. I turned back to the television, picked up the remote, and pressed the power button. The screen went completely dark. I watched my reflection appear in the glass, faint, framed by the ocean behind me and the soft shadows of the room. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to acceptance. Then I set the remote down and let the silence take the room again. I stared at the dark screen of the television until my reflection blurred into faint shine on the glass. The villa was completely quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I finally looked away and stepped outside to the deck, letting the warm night air settle around me while the ocean whispered against the stilts below. I told myself I needed rest, that I would not think about my family again tonight. But I knew that was a lie the moment I touched my phone. It had been silent for hours. No updates, no missed calls, no messages leaking through the cracks. I picked it up with the intention of setting an alarm for the next morning. I never made it that far. The moment the screen lit, a wave of notifications rolled up from the bottom like a rising tide. Unknown numbers, local numbers, my mom's number, my dad's number, even my aunt. Dozens of missed calls, most of them in the last 2 hours. I froze. People do not call like that unless something has gone very wrong. At first, I thought it was about Kira, that she had done something drastic after the fallout, or that Thomas had publicly said more. I hesitated before opening the voicemail tab. There were 3 messages in total. I could see the transcription previews under each one. 2 were silent. 1 was not. It was from my dad's number. I tapped it because some small part of me still didn't know how to ignore his voice. His message started with a heavy breath, one that hit my ear like a weight, then a pause, and then his voice strained in a way I had not heard since I was a child. "Hannah, you are the only one who can help us pay the debt now." My stomach tightened. For a moment, I thought the network had glitched, that maybe I had misread the words. But then his voice continued, lower, faster, almost embarrassed to be saying it out loud. "Use your inheritance. We need you to cover the foreclosure." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done, no reference to the wedding disaster, nothing but urgency and entitlement dressed up as desperation. He did not even ask if I was okay. He did not ask where I was. He did not ask why I had not shown up. The message clicked off abruptly, as if he had run out of breath or simply didn't know what else to say. I stared at the screen, replaying the sentence inside my mind. "You are the only one who can help us pay the debt now." The debt, the foreclosure, the moment of truth I had known was coming long before they admitted it. They had been hiding the notices, pretending the house wasn't in danger, insisting everything was under control. And now, with the wedding explosion turning their perfect facade inside out, they had no more distractions to hide behind. The bills were due. The lender had run out of patience. The house was days from being listed as repossessed. And suddenly, I mattered again. I sank onto the deck, my back against the smooth railing, letting the phone rest on my knee. A faint breeze carried across the water. The moonlight cast soft ripples along the surface of the lagoon. Everything around me was peaceful, in a way that mocked the chaos waiting on the other side of that voicemail. So that was why they wanted me, not because they missed me, not because they regretted what they did, not because someone finally understood that erasing me from the wedding had consequences. No. They wanted me because Grandma Margaret had changed her will, and they thought they could reach for me the same way they always had, like I was a tool in a drawer they had misplaced and suddenly remembered in a crisis. I listened to the voicemail again, not because I needed clarity, but because I wanted to hear what was missing. I wanted to confirm that my dad had not said a single word expressing guilt or remorse or even basic human empathy. He had not. My mom had not left any messages, but she had called. 8 times. She had not left a voicemail, which was somehow worse. It meant she wanted to rehearse nothing, promise nothing, explain nothing. She wanted me to pick up so she could talk to me, not to me. I opened her call log, stared at the list of missed calls, then closed it again. Then another call came through, from a number I recognized but had not saved, the number of my Aunt Carol. I let it ring. It went to voicemail after several seconds, and I watched her notification appear. I did not open it. I did not need to hear more. The story was already complete. They were drowning, and they wanted to throw me into the water so they could climb on top of me too. Breathe. I stood and walked back inside, letting the sliding door whisper shut behind me. I set my phone on the small table near the window and walked to the kitchenette for a glass of water, trying to steady myself. The cold water helped, but not enough. My hands trembled against the glass. Not from fear, from recognition. This was the moment I was never supposed to see. The moment when their need stripped away every polite excuse they had ever used to justify keeping me small. First at the rehearsal, then the group chat, then the invitation list, then the lie. They had erased me because the truth I carried was dangerous. And now they wanted me because the truth Grandma Margaret carried was more dangerous. Use your inheritance. The words echoed like footsteps in an empty hallway. My grandmother had intended her decision to be a mirror, a moral verdict, not a rescue plan for people who refused to listen. She had chosen me because she believed in me, because she saw what they did not. And they wanted to twist that into an obligation. I walked to the window and watched the waves shimmer, each gentle rise and fall, reflecting back the faint silver of the moon. It struck me then how distance was. It turned chaos into clarity. It turned noise into discernment. It turned the sharp edges of other people's expectations into something I could set down without bleeding. My phone buzzed again. Another call. My cousin's number this time. They were working their way through the family tree, casting lines into the ocean in hopes I would bite. I did not. I picked up the phone, opened the call history, and without letting myself hesitate, I slid my finger to the side and tapped the block. The red letters appeared on the screen like a verdict. One down. Mom's number came next. My thumb hovered for a moment. I thought of all the years I had given her unquestioned forgiveness. All the moments she had chosen convenience over honesty. All the times she had stood in front of me and shielded the wrong person for the wrong reasons. I blocked her too. My pulse stayed steady. I waited for regret to rise inside me. But it didn't. What came instead was a kind of clean silence, like something heavy had been lifted from the space just behind my ribs. I moved to my dad's number next. His voicemail was still open on the screen. I listened to the beginning one last time, letting the tone of his voice confirm everything I already knew. He had never called me unless he wanted something. Not when I graduated, not when I got my first promotion, not when I bought my first condo. He called when he needed me to fill a hole he had dug with his own hands. Block. The word flashed again. Final. Firm. Quiet. Voicemails do not disappear when you block someone, but the ability to send new ones does. It felt like closing a door they had kept wedged open for decades. Another number called. My aunt, again. I blocked her. Then my uncle. Then another cousin. Then my mom's sister. Each tap felt less like retaliation and more like housekeeping, clearing out the clutter that had been building since long before the wedding. Finally, when the call list showed nothing but red circles and blocked labels, I exhaled a long, slow breath I had been holding since the voicemail first appeared. The world around me was still. The resort was quiet. The ocean kept moving, unaware of the shift that had happened inside me. For the first time in my life, I was not someone's solution, not someone's target, not someone's moral cautionary tale. I was someone with choices. I turned my phone off completely and placed it face down on the nightstand. A small gesture, but it felt like closing the final page of a chapter that had dragged on far too long. Behind me, beyond the open windows, the water tapped silently against the wood supports, steady and unbothered. Like a reminder that the world continued, whether I answered the phone or not. I lay down on the bed without turning the lights on. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel angry. I felt finished. Whatever storm waited for them back home was no longer mine to weather. My eyes drifted closed slowly as the villa settled into darkness, and I let the quiet hold me with a gentleness I had never known from my own family. I woke early, not because of any alarm, but because my body had learned to rise with the first touch of sunlight across the water. The room glowed faintly blue, and for a moment I forgot the night before. Then I saw my phone on the nightstand, face down and silent, and memory washed back through me like a tide returning to shore. The voicemail, the calls, the debt, the foreclosure, and the truth beneath all of it. I was important again only because they had run out of time. I sat up slowly, letting the quiet morning settle over me. The air smelled like salt and something sweet drifting in from the lagoon. I moved to the deck with a mug of coffee and sat on the floor with my back against the railing, watching the sky lighten in steady gradients. The sun broke the horizon in a way that felt almost ceremonial, as if the world were welcoming a day where I no longer belonged to other people's emergencies. For a long time, I did nothing but breathe. I listened to the soft splash of fish beneath the stilts, the distant hum of a boat, the faint rustle of palm leaves from the island. No ringing phone, no demands, no guilt disguised as obligation. Just a life I had stepped into on my own terms. After a while, curiosity tugged at me. I turned on the phone, not because I intended to answer anything, but because I wanted to see what the world looked like, with the volume finally turned down. The screen lit up, but there were no new missed calls, no messages, no notifications from anyone I had blocked. The silence was almost startling. It felt like the first moment after a storm when you realize the wind has stopped, shaking the windows. I opened my email. There were 3 foreclosure notices, forwarded from my mom's old account. They were automated messages, the kind that do not bend or soften for the sake of human pride. Words like final extension and payment failure and processing repossession stared back at me. There was a date stamped across the top of each document, and I recognized immediately that it was no longer in the future. It was now. The window had closed. Their home was days from being taken by the lender. That was the real reason for the flood of phone calls. Not remorse. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing the house. Fear of public embarrassment. Fear of facing the consequences that money and secrecy had shielded them from for years. I scrolled past each notice until the screen felt too heavy in my hands. Then I closed the app. I did not need more proof. They had finally reached the end of the rope they had been pulling tighter with. Every decision they made. It was almost poetic that the very inheritance they had tried to bury was the one they now wanted me to use to rescue them. I left the villa and walked toward the small pier that extended out over the lagoon. The wooden planks were warm beneath my feet. I stood at the edge and watched the water shift between turquoise and pale green, the early light. Ripples swayed with the movement of small fish, and for a moment the entire world felt suspended in a hush. My mind drifted back through the years, through all the ways my family had shaped and bent me around their needs. Every time they wanted me to be quiet. Every time they told me I was too sensitive. Every time they expected me to forgive without being forgiven. They had groomed me to be useful, not seen. Predictable, not respected. They asked for understanding, but offered none in return. The voicemail was simply the final chapter in a book I had tried too long to rewrite. You are the only one who can help us pay the debt now. Use your inheritance. The irony would have been funny if it had not been so predictable. Behind me, someone walked down the boardwalk. I glanced over and saw Rachel approaching, her hair damp from the ocean, a towel draped over her shoulders. She gave me a gentle nod, not prying, not assuming anything, the same way she always did. I appreciated that more than she would ever know. Rough morning, she said quietly. Something like that, I answered. She did not ask for more. Instead, she stood beside me for a few minutes, both of us watching the water shimmer. When she finally walked away, she touched my arm lightly and said, "Take care of your peace. It is worth protecting." I let her words settle around me as she disappeared down the walkway. When I returned to my villa, my phone buzzed once. A text notification appeared from a number I recognized instantly as the bank, servicing the loan on my parents' house. It was a generic update, an automated reminder. But I knew what it meant. The timeline was no longer theoretical. The consequences had arrived. I sat at the small table inside the villa and looked at the phone for a long time. Then I opened the voicemail again, letting my dad's voice play out in the quiet room. The same sentence struck me each time. You are the only one. It was not the plea of a man who loved his daughter. It was the plea of a man who had run out of places to hide. When the voicemail ended, I pressed delete. Then I opened the contact list and scrolled through the blocked numbers. Seeing them all lined up, one after another, felt almost surreal. It was as if I were looking at a map of every boundary I had needed for years, but never built. Until now. I added one more number to the list. The bank's automated system, not because I wanted to ignore reality, but because their reality was no longer my responsibility. My grandmother had not changed her will so that I could become a safety net for people who rejected me. She changed it because she wanted me to have a life separate from their chaos, a life built on dignity, not debt. When the final number turned red on the screen, I lowered the phone to the table and let out a breath that trembled on the way out. I did not feel relief exactly. I felt something steadier, a finality that was not sharp or dramatic, but solid, in a way that grounded me. I stepped outside again just as the sun rose fully above the water, turning the ocean bright and shimmering, like someone had poured gold across the surface. The air felt warm against my skin. I closed my eyes and let that warmth soak into me. Back home, they would be panicking, calling anyone who could reach me, searching for explanations that painted them as the victims of circumstance rather than the architects of their own mistakes. They would not tell neighbors what happened. They would not tell friends. They would try to frame the foreclosure as an unavoidable setback, the wedding disaster as a misunderstanding, the inheritance shift as a miscommunication. But none of that was my concern anymore. The truth was simple. They needed money. They needed someone to fix their mess. They needed me only as long as I was willing to sacrifice myself for them. And I was done doing that. I sat at the edge of the deck and dipped my feet into the warm water below. Small fish scattered in shimmering arcs. The world moved on calmly, untouched by the collapse of people who had once believed the sun rose and set on their own decisions. I leaned back on my hands and let the quiet settle over me completely. My phone lay inside the villa, blocked list full, notifications silent, the final threads tying me to that old life slowly dissolving in the heat of the book. Morning. There were no more calls to take, no more emergencies disguised as love, no more guilt to carry. The blocked list was complete. The next few days moved with a strange, weightless rhythm, as if the world around me shifted into a quieter gear. I swam in the mornings, worked for a few steady hours in the afternoons, and let the evenings carry me into whatever peace the island decided to offer. But even in that calm, the reality unfolding back home found ways to drift across my screen in pieces and fragments, each one reflecting a story I was no longer part of, but had once been expected to fix. The wedding fallout did not fade. It grew. Clips of Thomas leaving the altar multiplied online, spreading through corners of the internet that had nothing to do with me or my records. Family. Each video seemed to sharpen the truth he spoke as he walked out. I would rather leave now than live a lie forever. People picked up that line like it was the quote of the month, stitching it into jokes, commentary, reaction videos, even relationship advice posts, in a way that felt surreal. My sister's lie had become a cautionary tale for strangers, and consequences, once denied, had begun to lock into place. The first real sign arrived in a news alert. Not a head, just a short financial notice forwarded automatically through a public record bot. I followed. The Ellison property had officially entered foreclosure proceedings. No extensions, no further negotiation. The lender had marked it as non-recoverable. I closed the alert without reading more, but the line stayed etched in my mind like something carved into stone. No further negotiation. Consequences do not negotiate. They simply arrive when the bill comes due. The next blow came through a mutual acquaintance who messaged me privately, not because she wanted gossip, but because she wanted to warn me. Canceling a wedding that close to the date came with legal and financial penalties, deposits, vendor fees, breach clauses, and in this case, with the truth about the false pregnancy leaking into the open, Thomas and his family had hired legal counsel. They were pursuing damages, real ones, not from me, from my parents, from Kira. The lie that was supposed to secure a wealthy future had instead opened the door to a lawsuit that threatened to devour what little my family had left. And because the house was already in foreclosure, they had nothing to shield themselves with. They were exposed from every side. I felt no triumph, only inevitability. On the third morning, I woke to another message, this one from a coworker in Boston who had stumbled across a news segment covering extravagant weddings gone wrong. My sister's ceremony was included among them. The anchor did not mention names, but the blurred footage was unmistakable. Kira's face streaked with mascara. My dad argued with the groom's uncle. The moment Grandma Margaret stood from her chair and spoke with a firmness even then, camera microphone could barely contain. The truth has been stepped on long enough. They replayed that line twice in the segment. I watched it twice and then closed the video. Kira, once addicted to posting every detail of her curated life, had disappeared from social media entirely. Every account locked. Every photo is archived. Every platform is silent. It was not remorse that drove her offline. It was humiliating. The kind that does not pass quickly. The kind that sinks into the fabric of how people see you. and how you see yourself. Meanwhile, I remained in my villa, answering work emails and joining video meetings as if nothing extraordinary had happened. My manager commented that I seemed more focused than usual. I told her the change of scenery helped. She said she hoped I would take more breaks like this. A coworker messaged me privately and said she admired how steady I had been during a stressful quarter. She had no idea what storms raged behind the scenes of my personal life, and I had no intention of letting those storms define me professionally. It felt strange being recognized for stability at the exact moment my family's world was collapsing under the weight of their own choices. Strange, but grounding. One afternoon, between meetings, my inbox filled with requests from podcast hosts and online storytellers who wanted me to share my experience. They used phrases like reclaim your narrative and empower other women and speak your truth to the world. But the truth did not need a stage. It did not need to be monetized or turned into content. It existed quietly without my voice pushing it forward. I declined every request, politely, firmly, without guilt. Whatever justice the universe had arranged was already unfolding without my participation. Later that same day, I learned through another forwarded notice that the house had officially been scheduled for auction. The date was set. The terms were final. My parents had appealed once, then twice, but both attempts had been denied. Foreclosure does not stop because someone is embarrassed. It does not stall because a wedding went wrong. It does not soften because a family is in disarray. It follows the numbers. It follows the unpaid bills. It follows the truth of what is owed. My dad tried one last time to reach me, not by phone this time, but through an email routed through a relative's address, something vague enough that it bypassed my block list. The message was short. The house is slipping away. We need help. You have the means. I closed the email without replying, blocked the sender, sat in silence until my breath steadied again. I understood the deeper message hidden under the words. It was not a plea for connection. It was not a reconciliation. It was a transaction disguised as family. Help us so we do not have to face what we have done. Help us because we still believe you owe us more than we owe you. But consequences do not negotiate. I had learned that in the hardest possible way. So had they. Around sunset, I walked along the path circling the island, watching the sky turn shades of rose and gold as the day sank into a quiet, warm evening. Families laughed near the shoreline. Couples toasted with glasses raised. A few children splashed in the shallows, while their parents watched with lazy smiles. Life went on around me, untouched by anything happening back home. For the first time in years, I felt the shape of my own life separate from my family's chaos. I felt the outline of who I could be if I stopped carrying burdens that were never mine to hold. It was not freedom exactly. It was clear. The next morning, I joined a meeting with my team. The call went smoothly. No glitches, no complications. Afterward, my manager stayed behind for a moment and smiled at me through the screen. Whatever you are doing, she said, keep doing it. You are delivering some of your best work. I thanked her and meant it. She did not know that stepping away from my family's noise had cleared the space inside me where competence and confidence live. In the afternoon, I took my laptop to a shaded cabana by the water. I worked for 2 hours, uninterrupted, letting the breeze cool my skin as I typed. When I finished, I closed the computer and leaned back on the cushion, letting the soft rustle of palm leaves lull my mind into a rare quiet. The world back home kept unraveling. The lawsuit, the foreclosure, the disappearing act Kira had pulled. But here, nothing demanded my attention. Nothing pulled at me. Nothing required fixing. The air itself felt like a boundary I had never been able to enforce until now. When evening came, I ordered dinner to my villa and ate while the sky faded into shades of violet. I watched small lights flicker on across the boardwalk connecting the villas, each one casting a soft golden reflection across the water. It was simple. Peaceful, the kind of moment that makes you realize how much of your life had been spent. bracing for impact that never needed to be yours to absorb. When I washed the last dish and set it on the drying rack, I felt a calm settle over me that was not temporary. It was the beginning of a different kind of life. A life where I measured my worth not by how well I handled other people's disasters, but by how gently I treated myself. The world outside the island could churn however it wanted. Tonight, I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and let the day end without a single thought of what anyone expected from me. For the first time in a very long time, a day in my life ended quietly, and that, more than anything, felt like the start of something real. The quiet at the end of each day had begun to feel familiar, almost like a companion instead of an empty space that needed filling. I woke the next morning with the same slow ease, stretching under the light cotton sheet as the soft glow of sunrise brushed across the ceiling. It took me a moment to remember what day it was, not because I was avoiding the thought, but because, for once, nothing in my life hinged on keeping track of anyone else's emergencies. I brewed a small cup of coffee in the villa's kitchenette and carried it out to the deck, settling into the lounge chair where the sun touched only half the wood. The air was cool for a few minutes before warming again, and I let that shift settle over me. It felt like a reminder that change could be gentle when no one was forcing it. I had only a few days left in Maldives, and the realization struck me with an unexpected softness instead of dread. This place had become a pause button on a life that had always felt too loud, too demanding, too full of edges I had been told to smooth out. But pauses were not meant to last forever. They were meant to help you breathe long enough to decide what came next. That morning, for the first time since arriving, I opened my laptop, not for work, but for myself. A blank document filled the screen, and I stared at it until the cursor blinked like a question I had avoided for years. What do you want to say that no one else will hear? I started typing slowly, the words forming without structure, without plan. A letter, or maybe several letters layered into one. I did not address it to anyone by name. I did not need to. The people it belonged to were woven through every sentence. I wrote about the childhood version of myself who believed being useful was the same as being loved. I wrote about staying quiet so others could stay comfortable. I wrote about the years I spent patching cracks that were never mine to fix, bending around expectations that grew heavier with each mistake my sister made, or each financial misstep my parents tried to hide. I wrote about wanting to belong to a family that did not want the real me, only the version of me that could solve problems they created. The words spilled out in long lines, sometimes steady, sometimes trembling. At one point, I stopped typing and let my hands rest in my lap. The ocean outside whispered against the stilts of the villa, steady and indifferent, as if reminding me that the world outside my old life kept moving whether I carried their weight or not. I went back to the letter and wrote about my grandmother, not the inheritance or the final decisions she made, but her eyes, the last time she looked at me before she passed. Clear, unafraid, honest, like she had known exactly what kind of strength I would need one day and wanted to leave a reminder behind. Then I wrote about the wedding, not the spectacle or the meltdown or the lies. Just one sentence. I deserved to be told the truth, even if the truth was ugly. When I finally stopped typing, the document stretched far longer than I expected. I read the words back once, slowly. They held no anger. No accusation, only recognition. A quiet acceptance that nothing I wrote could repair a relationship that had been broken long before the wedding, the lie, or the foreclosure. The fracture had not been sudden. It had been gradual, built from years of small betrayals that became normal only because I refused to name them. I closed the document without saving it, not because the words did not matter, but because they had already done what they needed to do. Writing them was the point, not preserving them. Around midday, I walked along the shoreline, letting the water lap at my ankles. The sun warmed my shoulders, and the breeze carried the scent of salt and something sweet drifting from the palm trees nearby. Every now and then a guest passed by with a nod or a soft smile. No one knew me. No one needed anything from me. The anonymity felt like air I had not breathed in years. I found a shaded spot near the far end of the beach and sat cross-legged in the sand. Children played in the shallows, their laughter echoing across the water. A couple nearby debated which excursion to book for the evening. I watched them with a strange curiosity, realizing how much life I had missed by staying tangled in a family role that suffocated me. For a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to rebuild a life where my choices were not shaped by guilt or obligation, but by curiosity, joy, and quiet confidence. A life where my value was not tied to rescuing people who never intended to change. By the time I stood and brushed the sand from my legs, the idea no longer felt imaginary. It felt possible. Back at the villa, I opened my suitcase and began folding the few clothes I had unpacked earlier in the week. I rolled them neatly and set them inside, then zipped the bag halfway before stopping. A small, unexpected ache rose in my chest. Leaving meant stepping back into the world that contained everything I had walked away from. But the ache was not fear. It was recognition. Growth always comes with a kind of mourning. As I zipped the bag fully, I thought about my family. Not with longing, not with bitterness, just with honesty. The relationship we once had did not exist anymore. The version of myself who worked to preserve it no longer existed either. The fixer role that had shaped so much of my identity had crumbled the day I realized their love was conditional on my usefulness. That realization hurt, but it freed me. In the late afternoon, I sat at the small bistro table by the window and watched the water shift colors as clouds drifted overhead. I let my thoughts settle into place, one truth after another. I could still care about them while refusing to carry their burdens. I could still remember good moments without excusing the harm. I could still wish them well without returning to a role that erased me. These were not contradictions. They were boundaries. And boundaries were a sign of self-respect, not cruelty. I poured myself a small glass of sparkling water and raised it slightly, not as a toast, but as a quiet acknowledgement. I had survived the thing I thought I would never be strong enough to face. Not the wedding, not the lie, not the foreclosure, but the moment I finally understood that I could walk away and still remain whole. Near sunset, the sky turned brilliant shades of amber and rose. I stepped onto the deck with my packed bag resting beside me and stood there until the last strip of sunlight faded into the horizon. It felt like watching a chapter close in real time. When I finally stepped back inside, I pulled the sliding door shut and listened to the faint click of the latch. Something about that sound felt symbolic. A door closing that no longer needed to remain open. The next morning, I woke before my alarm and dressed quietly. My suitcase waited by the door. The villa looked exactly as it had when I arrived, but I did not. I felt taller somehow, even though my feet were steady on the same wooden floorboards. Maybe this was what it meant to grow without anyone witnessing it. I rolled my suitcase down the boardwalk toward the reception building, the wheels tapping lightly against the planks. A staff member greeted me with a warm smile, asked if I enjoyed my stay, and wished me a safe flight. I thanked her sincerely. She had no idea how much this place had given me. As the small boat carried me across the calm morning water toward the airport, I watched the villas shrink into the distance until they became nothing more than tiny dots along a bright blue line. The wind tangled through my hair and the sunlight flickered across the waves. And for the first time, I did not feel like a daughter escaping a family problem. I felt like a woman stepping into her own life. The Maldives grew smaller behind me, but what I had gained here did not. It moved with me, steady and unshakable, as the boat carried me forward into whatever came next. The flight back to Austin felt quieter than the flight that had taken me to Maldives. Maybe it was because I carried less with me this time, not in luggage, but in weight. I sat by the window and watched Texas stretch out beneath the plane as it descended, a familiar patchwork of roads and rooftops slowly coming into view. When the wheels touched the runway with a soft thud, I exhaled without even realizing I had been holding my breath. I stepped into the terminal and felt the shift immediately. Maldives had smelled like salt and warm light. Austin smelled like coffee, concrete warmed by the sun, and the faint, comforting scent of home. Yet nothing inside me twisted the way it used to. No dread, no anticipation of the next call or the next demand. For the first time in a long time, coming home did not feel like walking into an unfinished fight. My rideshare wound through the familiar streets until it reached my apartment building. I carried my suitcase up the stairs and paused at the door. The hallway was still and warm. The same framed photo of wildflowers hung beside my neighbor's unit. A small package waited on my welcome mat, probably a book I had ordered weeks ago and forgotten about. Everything was normal, completely unchanged, except me. Inside, sunlight fell across the hardwood floor in long, soft strips. My plant in the corner had sprouted a new leaf while I had been gone. I ran my fingers across its edge, almost amused that even it had managed to grow during a week when everything else in my life had broken apart and rebuilt itself. I unpacked slowly, folding each piece of clothing and placing it back in drawers with a kind of care I had not felt before. When the suitcase was empty, I stored it in the closet and stood there for a moment, letting the stillness of the room settle around me. Nothing pressed at my chest. No unanswered calls. No expectations waiting on the other end of a vibrating phone. Just silence. And this time, silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like permission. My phone stayed quiet for the first day, then the second. By the end of the week, it was clear the calls had stopped entirely. No more voicemails slipping through alternate numbers. No more emails routed through relatives. No updates about foreclosure or legal trouble or public embarrassment. Nothing. It was as if my family had turned a page in a story where I no longer existed. And strangely, that absence did not hurt the way I once feared it would. There was an ache, yes, but it was honest. Clean. The kind that comes when something heavy has been lifted off your shoulders and your body finally notices the soreness left behind. I went back to work in the downtown office 2 days a week. My manager greeted me with a warm smile and said my calm energy was contagious. Coworkers asked about the trip, and I shared only the parts that belonged to me. The ocean, the quiet mornings, the clarity that came in slow waves. No one needed to know the rest. And for the first time, I did not feel tempted to explain myself. One evening, I stopped at a grocery store on my way home. I picked out a few things for dinner and moved through the aisles with an easy pace. Families shopped around me, kids tugging at carts, people debating brands of pasta sauce. Ordinary life unfolded in front of me, steady and predictable, and I realized how long my own life had revolved around chaos. I had forgotten how peaceful the ordinary could be. At home, I cooked a simple meal, letting the sound of onions sizzling in the pan fill the apartment. I ate at the small table by the window, watching the sky dim into shades of blue. When I finished, I washed the dishes and left them to dry. A life without emergencies had room for such tiny rituals. Later that night, I sat on the couch with a blanket over my legs and let my mind wander. I thought about the wedding, the lies, the fallout, the videos, the foreclosure. But mostly I thought about the moment Kira told me there was no space for me at her wedding. That single sentence had sliced through more than just an invitation. It had carved open the truth about the role I had played in our family for far too long. Being cut from the wedding was not the real loss. It was a symbol, the final confirmation that I had been living in a family where honesty was treated as a threat, and loyalty was measured by silence. The true loss would have been staying, playing the fixer again, pretending I could glue the pieces back together. Pretending I owed them that. Instead, I left the pieces where they fell, and I stopped believing I needed permission to live a life of my own. A few days later, I opened my laptop and started drafting a list. Not a letter, not a confession, just a list of things I wanted to hold on to. Boundaries, values, small promises to myself. Keep space only for people who respect it. Tell the truth, even when it is inconvenient. Do not trade your peace for someone else's denial. Silence is not weakness. Walking away is not failure. The list grew longer, but it never felt heavy. It felt like building a doorway. That weekend, I took a long walk around Lady Bird Lake. The path curved beneath the trees, and sunlight shimmered off the water like broken glass. Runners passed me. Dogs pulled against their leashes. People kayaked in slow arcs beyond the shore. Everything felt alive in a way I had not noticed in years. Halfway around the loop, I stopped at a bench and sat down. The breeze lifted my hair. The lake rippled with gentle waves. I thought about who I was without the role I had carried for so long. I was quieter, but not small. Softer, but not weak. Stronger, but not hardened. I was a woman who had finally stepped out of a story that was never written for her. When I got home that evening, I poured a glass of water and sat at my dining table, letting the cool air from the ceiling fan brush across my shoulders. I had one chapter left to close, and it needed to be spoken aloud, even if no one else would hear it. I said quietly to the empty room, I hope they find what they need. I hope they learn what they refuse to see. And I hope they understand someday that cutting me out did not break me. It freed me. The words hung in the air for a few seconds before dissolving into the quiet. I picked up my phone and opened the Notes app. Not to reach out, not to reopen old wounds, just to leave one last reminder to myself. No space for me meant no space for them. Not anymore. I closed the app, set the phone on the table, and felt the stillness settle gently around me. And now, if you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.